Welcome to Local Edition. I'm Brad Pomerance. We're in Sacramento today in the state capitol. We are joined by Toni Atkins. She is the Speaker-Emeritus of the California State Assembly. She's a candidate for the California State Senate. And I just must ask, how does a kid from Appalachia with no running water become the Speaker of the California State Assembly?
Well, it's something I certainly never envisioned. As a kid growing up in Southwest Virginia, California was actually one of my favorite states.
Of course it was.
I thought Sacramento was a great capital, and I loved it.
Right.
I never thought I would live here, but I ended up here, joined my sister when she was in the Navy, and, you know, I didn't plan this, but I got involved in politics locally in San Diego.
And let's talk about that. You were on the City Council for 8 years.
8 years.
Was then elected to the California State Assembly, and then at the end of your 6-year cycle, because you still are part of that term limit cycle, you were named Speaker. It's a remarkable journey.
Well, it is, and I think you know, what gave me this opportunity, ultimately, we talk a lot about this in California, is education. I had a really good education in public schools growing up in Virginia. Pretty homogenous community.
Understand.
Not a lot of the issues we see here in California with all the cultures and languages and social issues.
Right.
So I had an opportunity to go to good public schools, managed to go to college, the first in my family to graduate.
Right.
And it just gave me a whole different perspective of the world. I wouldn't be here without having had that opportunity.
And you are much more than what I'm about to ask about, but you were the first woman to be a part of the LGBT community that became Speaker of the Assembly. I mean, that is historic. Is that part of the journey, or is it separate from the journey?
It's part. You know, I'm incredibly mindful that I'm a woman, that I'm a member of the LGBT community, and frankly, I'm the first San Diegan to become Speaker.
And that's relevant.
And the first Appalachian.
But, there you have it, right. That's another story.
But the first San Diegan. And you know, so you are mindful of your place in history.
Right.
I stand certainly on the shoulders of a lot of pioneers in the LGBT community, in the women's community, but really, you know, I'm mindful that I'm still part of making history. And I'm fortunate to have had people to give me the opportunity. John Perez gave me an incredible opportunity to be in leadership. Right.
He was the first LGBT member to become Speaker, and you were the second, and it's pretty remarkable. It happened fairly quickly, and it really says a lot about our state and where we are as a state, or does it?
Well, it does. I mean, thankfully, you know, we still have a ways to go. The transgender community, I sponsor and carry a lot of bills to support equality and equal rights for the transgender community. So we're not completely there. Women aren't completely there. Look at the presidential discussion and look at what women make compared to men. You know, this past year we passed the most far-reaching fair pay bill in the country. So we haven't arrived, but it sure does feel a lot better than it did 20 years ago.
And when you mention women, it's hard to deny that women really saw their greatest numbers in the California State Legislature. Not recently.
No, early 90s.
Yeah, early 90s, kind of in the wake of the Clarence Thomas hearings.
The Year of the Woman.
The Year of the Woman, Barbara Boxer, Dianne Feinstein being elected to the United States Senate. And while female numbers are stable, they are at a certain level not growing.
Well, the lowest in decades, actually.
Oh,
we're less than 25% of the legislature. 120 of us in the Senate and the Assembly, 25%. So we're losing ground, not gaining ground.
Could it be, though, we're at a point where gender just doesn't matter?
Oh, I don't think so. I think it matters significantly in terms of some of the legislation that gets passed.
But in terms of the election to a body, I mean, I think about, for example, Chris Holden, who's a member of the African American community. He does not represent an African American district.
Right.
And so I'm wondering, are we kind of in a post-gender world, if I could say? I don't know that I'm not advocating.
Here's what I think. Here's whether we're talking about the African American community, women, LGBT, other ethnic populations. I think there is this feeling in our society that there is equality. Look how far we've come. So we've arrived, but the practice does not match where we think we are in our minds. When you see all the things we don't have. And I think you've got a younger generation of people who've grown up with more freedoms And yet, when you see what's happening in reproductive rights and abortion in this country, we are going back. California was the only state several years ago with my AB 154 to pass a bill related to rights and expanding rights.
Reaffirming, even if Roe versus Wade vanishes on the national level, we have a protected right.
Right.
I want to ask you, I'm sure that was one of your proudest accomplishments.
It was.
But during your term as Speaker, what were your proudest accomplishments? I can think of a couple. I'll start with water. I don't know if you would define that as a proud accomplishment, but I think it's hard to deny. Talk to us about the water bond and the bipartisan nature of it. The voters passed it overwhelmingly.
Right. Well, I think the thing I was most excited about by the water bond was there was an initial discussion that said, how many votes do we need in the legislature to pass this and to get a better package? And someone gave me that number, and it was far short of everyone. And I said, that's not going to work for California. This is an issue that impacts every single community. Republican, Democrat, it's actually less of a partisan issue than it is a regional issue.
True.
And so I really felt like we can't leave anyone behind. If we expect the voters to pass this, we have to give them a reason to support it. And so it made me proud that we were able to do that and leave nobody behind. Groundwater management, 150 years, California was probably one of the few states that doesn't have a groundwater management
Texas
program.
had groundwater management before we did.
I know it's policy. It makes your eyes glaze over.
But it's important.
For California, significant. I think some of the movement we've been able to do on income inequality and poverty in this state, we've lived through a decade of recession. I came in, we had a $26 billion deficit. That was hard. So I have lived through a deficit and the restoration of our fiscal stability.
I want to ask you about another issue that also crossed partisan boundaries, and that deals with a bill that did ultimately pass, physician aid in dying. That was a bill that really tore at the heartstrings of so many of us, whether we're Democrats, Republicans, North, South, East, West.
Right. It was a personal issue, not a partisan.
Right. But you were part of the leadership that was able to shepherd that bill to an ultimate conclusion and successful signing. Talk to me about that process, if you may.
Well, interesting. We were in special session, and so it enabled me as the Speaker to set new committees. And that bill stalled in the Health Committee. So under special session, we established new committees for transportation, because we have a transportation special session, and for health care. And I appointed a new committee, and it gave another renewed opportunity for that piece of legislation to be discussed and passed.
And that's part of the parliamentary prowess that one needs to develop as Speaker. And so give me a sense about what you learned being the Speaker and how to navigate the legislative process, the executive branch with a man who...
Right, and we didn't know the governor would sign that. Remember,
true.
It was getting it through the legislature, but it was, I think if people had put money on whether he would sign it, many would have said he wouldn't.
A theologian himself.
But it became a very personal decision for many, and he recognized that. He's very thoughtful. I think in terms of the ability to do things as Speaker, I really believe in fairness and, that you should do things in a way that is, of course, transparent, that is fair. People need to know what you're doing. But also, we're in a political world. And every now and then you see an opportunity to do something that you really believe in, and you take that opportunity. And, I took the opportunity, and I feel like it was a really important thing to do.
Her name is Toni Atkins. She is the Speaker-Emeritus of the California State Assembly. She is a candidate for the state Senate. That election will be held in June 2016. My name is Brad Pomerance. This is Local Edition.